At 6:57 a.m. on a cool Saturday morning in early spring, Marianne Collins sat alone at her kitchen table in the same house she had lived in for over 30 years. The air inside was warm from the kettle on the stove, and sunlight was just starting to peek through the curtains. Her hands cradled a half-full mug of coffee, the steam curling up into the quiet. She hadn't read yesterday's newspaper yet. It was still neatly folded, resting beneath her glasses. Then the phone rang, sharply, urgently, shattering the silence. She glanced at the landline screen. Brandon, her son, the last person she expected to hear from this early. She answered cautiously. "Brandon? Mom," he said quickly, too quickly. "I know it's early, but just hear me out." Her shoulders stiffened. "Okay, what's going on?" "Well, it's about Ava's birthday party today. Rebecca and we really want you to come early, around 1:30 before the guests arrive." Marianne squinted. "Since when do I need to be convinced to attend my granddaughter's birthday? I haven't missed one yet." "No, I know. That's not what I meant," Brandon said, his voice suddenly nervous. She heard a sharp whisper in the background. "Rebecca, no doubt. Rebecca's just been planning this one for weeks, and she really wanted to make sure you'll be there." Marianne swirled her spoon in the coffee mug. "Rebecca, the same woman who usually gives me a 2-second hello at family events?" "Yeah, she's trying to make things better," he said. His laugh sounded thin, like something he hadn't rehearsed properly. "We thought maybe you could come early so we can talk about some family stuff." She put the spoon down slowly. "What kind of family stuff?" "Oh, he said too casually, just the future. Ways we can all stay connected. Rebecca has a few ideas." Marianne rose from her chair and walked toward the window, phone pressed to her ear. Outside, her neighbor was watering a row of daffodils along the fence line, but her mind was already turning. She knew Brandon's tone. She knew when he was covering something up. "I see," she said evenly. "Well, of course I'll be there. Wouldn't miss Ava's birthday for the world." "Perfect," Brandon said with a forced brightness. "And Mom, just keep an open mind, okay?" She didn't respond to that. Not directly. After the call ended, she stood in the kitchen for a long while, listening to the quiet. Then her eyes wandered to the refrigerator where Ava's latest crayon drawing hung. 4 stick figures under a crooked sun. Me, Daddy, Mommy, and Grandma. It was scrawled in purple, Ava's favorite marker. Ava was the only bright light left in a life that had slowly dimmed after her husband Edward died 3 years ago. Edward had been steady, quiet, and full of insight. He'd warned her, on more than one occasion, about Brandon's growing dependence. The last thing he ever told her, in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and uncertainty, was this: "Promise me you'll protect Ava, but watch Brandon carefully. He's weak, and weak people make dangerous choices when someone strong is whispering in their ear." At the time, she assumed he meant Brandon's old high school friends, or his get-rich-quick schemes. But now, she wondered if Edward had seen something in Rebecca that she hadn't. In her bedroom closet, Marianne chose a soft blue blouse, the same one she had worn to Edward's funeral. As she buttoned it, her eyes landed on the corner of the closet where Edward's old coat still hung. She hadn't moved it. Couldn't. In the kitchen, she passed the fridge again. Right next to Ava's drawing was her grocery list, and a yellow sticky note reminding her to call the bank on Monday. She thought again of Brandon's request. Come early. Talk about the future. They were planning something. She grabbed her keys from the counter and walked toward the garage. Her hand hesitated over the car remote as her eyes landed on Edward's old truck, still covered with a canvas sheet. She hadn't sold it. Couldn't. She still made payments on it after he died, even when it just sat there. Maybe that's what Brandon and Rebecca were counting on, that she still couldn't say no to family. But she could. She just hadn't shown them that yet. By 8:15 a.m., she was walking into North Creek Plaza with a focused stride. She went straight to the toy store. The Lego architecture sets were lined up like trophies. Ava had been obsessed with buildings ever since her class took a field trip to see the downtown bridge renovation. She chose the Liberty Tower set, $180. Next, she walked into a sporting goods store and bought a light blue Trek bicycle with reflective strips and a basket, $325. Then, a quick stop at the florist, a dozen white roses wrapped in silver paper. Rebecca liked roses, $28. By 9:30, she had spent just under $600. But it wasn't the money that weighed on her. It was the silence underneath it all, the strange quiet between her and Brandon lately, the tension in his voice this morning. And now, with a whisper from a neighbor she ran into in the mall parking lot, her suspicions grew stronger. Dorothy, her neighbor for 15 years, casually mentioned that she'd seen Brandon and Rebecca leaving First Horizon Bank earlier that week with what she described as a stack of official-looking paperwork. They looked serious. I just figured maybe they were refinancing something, Dorothy had said with a polite chuckle. Marianne had smiled and nodded, pretending not to care. But inside, her instincts screamed. By the time she returned home, she wrapped the Lego set carefully, tied a bow around the bike, and placed the roses in a vase on her hallway table. She ate a light lunch and left the house at exactly 1:45 p.m. The decorations at Brandon's house were brighter than ever before. Streamers across doorways, balloon arches, little signs that read Ava's Big 9. Rebecca answered the door with too much enthusiasm. "Marianne, you look amazing. Come in, come in." That was the first red flag. The second was Brandon's voice echoing from the living room like a circus barker. "There she is, the amazing woman who taught me everything I know." The third came not from Brandon or Rebecca, but from Ava. She hugged her tightly and whispered, "I need to talk to you alone, Grandma. It's really important." Marianne knelt, eyes serious. "Later, okay? Be brave. I'll come find you." The rest of the party felt like a stage play. Brandon introduced her to every guest with awkward praise. Rebecca floated around the room, refilling her wine glass before she could finish it. Both hovered around her, blocking conversations that might veer off course. Their behavior was perfectly timed, controlled, and disturbingly obvious. At one point, Marianne slipped away under the pretense of using the restroom. Ava followed quietly. As soon as they were alone in the hallway, Ava whispered, "Grandma, they're going to take your money after the party. I heard them last night." Marianne's heart dropped. Ava continued, "Mom said you have too much for someone living alone. She said the papers from the bank would fix that. Dad said, what if she finds out? And Mom said it'd be too late." Marianne hugged her fiercely. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," she whispered. "But for now, we act like we don't know. Can you be brave for me?" Ava nodded. "Will you still love me if they get mad?" Marianne's voice didn't even waver. "Nothing they do could ever change how much I love you." They returned to the party hand in hand, but inside, everything had changed, and Marianne already knew exactly what she was going to do. Marianne barely spoke as she drove away from Brandon's house that evening, her hands tight on the wheel and her mind sharper than it had been in months. The smell of cake and party decorations clung to her clothes, but her thoughts were only on Ava's whisper in the hallway. "They're going to take your money after the party." The sentence echoed in her ears like a dropped hammer in a quiet room. She pulled into her driveway slowly, passing the rose bushes she and Edward had planted during their 25th wedding anniversary. He had dug each hole by hand, laughing every time he hit a root or rock. Those bushes had bloomed faithfully every year since. Inside, the house welcomed her with its familiar stillness. She placed the keys gently on the entry table, next to a framed photo of Edward, standing by the lake, fishing rod in hand, grinning like he'd just told a joke. "You were right," she whispered. In her office, the shelves still held the old ledgers from the supply company they'd built together. Marianne sat at the same oak desk where she'd signed her first business contract. She pulled open the bottom drawer and reached for the black folder she hadn't touched in years, labeled Financial Support, Brandon and Rebecca. She started flipping through the pages. Credit card statements, wire transfers, bank deposits, all totaled, she had sent them over $72,000 in the last 3 years. She had paid their mortgage for 6 months when Brandon was between jobs. She had covered Ava's private school tuition until things stabilized. She had loaned money to help Rebecca with her business classes Marianne later found out she never attended. Every transaction had been wrapped in guilt or smothered in gratitude. But now it all felt like a setup. Her eyes hardened as she reached for her legal pad. She didn't cry. She calculated. The next morning, Marianne sat in her kitchen sipping coffee, the yellow legal pad in front of her now filled with a bullet point list titled, The exit strategy. Step 1. Contact James Whitaker, VP at Brookridge First Bank. Step 2. Contact Catherine Bell, Notary Public. Step 3. Isolate and document power of attorney risks. Step 4. Secure all financial and property assets. Step 5. Expose the setup with professional witnesses. By 9 a.m., she was already on the phone with James. James, it's Marianne Collins. I've been reviewing my portfolio, and I'd like to consolidate a few things. Are you available to stop by tomorrow morning? Of course, he replied. Everything all right? Perfectly fine, she lied. Just taking care of the future. She hung up and immediately dialed Catherine Bell. Catherine, I need notary services at my home tomorrow morning at 9:45. It's a sensitive family matter. Bring your seal and your sharpest instincts. Catherine didn't hesitate. I'll be there. What's going on? I think someone's trying to legally erase me. That evening, Marianne sat in her armchair, wrapped in Edward's old gray cardigan. She picked up the framed photo again and looked into his eyes. I'm going to stop them, Ed. I'm going to protect what we built. For Ava. At precisely 10:05 a.m. the next morning, Brandon and Rebecca arrived at her house. They weren't alone. Waiting in the study with Marianne were James Whitaker and Catherine Bell. Both seated calmly, their presence entirely professional. Brandon blinked when he saw them. Rebecca hesitated only a second longer before recovering. Well, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Looks like we've got a full house. Marianne gestured toward the empty chairs. Please, sit. They did. Rebecca pulled out a leather portfolio, crisp and official, and opened it on the desk. These are just some simple forms, she said. A power of attorney agreement for banking and healthcare decisions. Nothing dramatic, just streamlining things. Catherine reached for the papers. Mind if I review before I notarize? Of course, Rebecca said smoothly, sliding them across. James remained quiet, hands folded. Marianne looked at Brandon. You brought these forms to help me, is that right? He nodded. We've been worried about how overwhelmed you've seemed lately. Marianne didn't respond right away. She waited until Catherine looked up from the documents and gave a subtle nod of confirmation. The papers were authentic, legally binding, and if signed, would give Brandon and Rebecca full control of every financial and medical decision in her life. Then Marianne stood up. You can stop pretending now, she said. Brandon blinked. What? I know about the meeting you had at James's bank last Tuesday, she continued, her voice calm but unshakable. You asked about conservatorship procedures, emergency filings, mental competency evaluations. James cleared his throat. I can confirm that. Their questions were extremely specific. Rebecca's face paled. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Were these documents prepared under the assumption that Ms. Collins was mentally unfit? Marianne answered before either of them could speak. They planned to have me declared incompetent and take everything. My house, my investments, my independence. That's not true, Brandon began, but Marianne cut him off. I have documentation of every dollar I've ever given you, she said coldly. $72,000. Mortgage payments, car loans, school tuition, all justified with some family crisis you invented. Rebecca's voice was tight. We were trying to help. You seemed off. Marianne leaned forward. I was never confused. I was testing you. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed. Catherine slid the papers aside. I won't be notarizing anything today. James added. And if you continue to pursue guardianship under false pretenses, I will personally notify our legal department. The silence that followed was deep and deserved. Marianne reached into her desk drawer and pulled out another folder. She laid it flat on the desk. This is my revised will. Everything I own, including the house, rental properties, and my investment accounts, is now held in an irrevocable trust for Ava. She will gain access to it when she turns 21. Brandon looked stunned. Mom, you have 1 year, she said, to prove that you're not the same man who sat in my house trying to steal from me. If in that time you both maintain steady employment, avoid legal entanglements, and show me you're capable of raising Ava with integrity, I will consider restoring a secondary fund. Rebecca swallowed. And if we don't? Marianne's expression was steel. Then you'll get nothing. Not now. Not ever. She stood. You can see yourselves out. As Brandon and Rebecca stumbled out the door, too stunned to argue, Marianne turned back toward Catherine and James. Thank you both, she said simply. You were impressive, Catherine replied. More than that, James added. You were surgical. Marianne offered a tired but resolute smile. They thought I was old, alone, and weak. They forgot I ran a business for 30 years and built it from a single truck and my bare hands. She turned toward Edward's photograph again, sitting proudly on the bookshelf. They forgot who raised them. The door shut behind Brandon and Rebecca with a firm finality. Marianne didn't move. Not right away. She stood in the center of her home office, listening to the silence that followed their hasty departure, letting it settle deep into her bones like a long overdue exhale. For months, she'd felt the pressure building, the manipulations cloaked as kindness, the increasing family discussions that circled like vultures over her future. And now, the performance was over. The truth had been dragged into the light. She turned toward Edward's photo on the shelf, his gray flannel shirt, his lopsided grin. The last person who had truly stood by her without question. We did it, she said softly. The following morning, Marianne moved with precision. She gathered every document Brandon and Rebecca had left behind, every power of attorney form, every authorization, every signature block they'd so confidently assumed she would sign, and filed them neatly in a folder marked Attempted Fraud September. Then she called her attorney and arranged a meeting to finalize the trust transfer. By midweek, everything had been formalized. Her home, her 3 rental properties, her investment accounts, every asset she'd once planned to leave directly to Brandon, was now held in a legally fortified trust in Ava's name. The only people who could access it were Ava, once she turned 21, and Marianne herself as the trustee. She also added something new. A clause. It stated that if Brandon and Rebecca attempted to challenge the trust in court or by deception, they would permanently forfeit all future consideration. And Marianne wasn't bluffing. Edward would have insisted on it. 10 days passed. Then 2 weeks. No calls. No emails. No angry voicemails or late-night attempts to smooth things over. Just silence. Marianne wasn't sure if it was a retreat or a regrouping. But either way, she welcomed the quiet. She filled her days with routine. Early morning gardening in Edward's rose beds, reading by the bay window, and volunteering twice a week at Ava's elementary school. The children called her Grandma M, and Ava beamed each time someone asked if she was hers. They did crafts together, read picture books. Sometimes Ava would glance at her across the classroom, her eyes searching for reassurance, and Marianne would nod subtly, always present, always watching. She didn't need to say it aloud. You're safe now. 3 weeks later, Marianne heard a knock on her side door, an unusual choice. Only Brandon used that door. It was the one he came through as a teenager when he snuck in late or needed to borrow money. She opened it. Brandon stood there alone. No Rebecca. No theatrics. Just a man who looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. Mom, he said, not stepping inside. I didn't call first. No, you didn't. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I almost didn't. He swallowed. Can I talk to you? Marianne paused, then stepped aside. Brandon walked in slowly, as if each step required permission. He stood awkwardly in the kitchen, staring at the old ceramic cookie jar shaped like a barn. Edward had bought it at a flea market when Brandon was 5. I got a job, he said. I know, Marianne said. Ava told me. He looked surprised. She also told me you've been driving her to school every day, packing her lunches, helping her with homework. Brandon looked down. We're trying. Marianne leaned against the counter. Are you trying to impress me? Or are you actually trying? He looked up. I don't know anymore. Maybe both. But it feels different now. I clock in at 6 a.m., unload freight until 3 o'clock. I come home sore and tired, but honest. No tricks. No excuses. That's good, she said simply. Brandon took a breath. Rebecca's working part-time now. Receptionist at a hair salon in town. She hates it, but she shows up. Marianne raised an eyebrow. And why are you telling me this now? Because I know what we did. And I know it's going to take more than a year of pay stubs to fix it. But I wanted to face you. Not with forms. Not with signatures. Just truth. She let the silence stretch, watching him the way she used to study construction estimates. Looking for missing pieces, for things that didn't add up. But this time, what she saw was sincerity. Or something very close to it. You've got 11 months left, she said. He blinked. You're still counting? I count everything, Brandon. Always have. Later that night, Marianne sat in her study, flipping through the worn pages of Edward's old journal. He'd kept one for years, writing notes about projects, thoughts on people, even doodles of floor plans for buildings he'd never get to build. She stopped on a page dated 5 years before his passing. The problem isn't weakness. It's comfort. People like Brandon get too used to being carried and forget what their legs are for. If he ever has to walk on his own again, make sure he does it without your wallet. Marianne closed the book and leaned back in her chair. She wasn't angry anymore, but she wasn't soft either. Not like before. The trust was locked. The legal defenses in place. The will updated. Edward's wishes respected. Now came the part that truly mattered. The part that wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching. Letting them fall. Letting them rebuild. Letting Ava see that love can be fierce but not foolish. That it can forgive but not forget. And if Brandon truly wanted to change, he'd have to prove it without ever asking again. That was the price. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. Marianne rose with the sun, her breath visible in the chilled air as she stepped barefoot into the backyard. Dew clung to the grass, and birdsong hummed faintly in the trees. Edward's rose garden was beginning to stir again. Buds had formed. Leaves had deepened. She crouched beside the largest bush and carefully clipped a pair of spent blooms, mindful not to disturb the fresh growth. It was early April. 7 months into the year she had given Brandon and Rebecca. 7 months since the day they tried to take everything. And 7 months since Ava had whispered the truth that changed everything. Marianne stood and looked toward the far edge of her yard, where the sun cast long shadows across the old white stone path Edward had laid himself. Every step she took on that path was a reminder of him, of their life, their work, their shared belief that people should earn what they keep. She had lived by that ever since. Inside, her tea was still steeping when her phone buzzed. A text from Ava. Grandma, I got first place in the school invention fair. Mommy and Daddy helped me make a watering flower stand for birds. Can I show you today? Marianne smiled as she typed a reply. I'd love that. Come by after school. I'll bake banana bread. A minute later, Ava sent back a photo. The invention was charming. 2 flower pots stacked on a frame, with a small bird perch and a string pull cup that allowed the flowers to be watered when birds landed. Underneath it was a name in bright pink marker. Ava's garden helper. It was exactly the kind of thing Edward would have been proud of. By mid-morning, Marianne had finished her bookkeeping and reviewed 2 envelopes from her attorney. Inside were the second quarter financial statements Brandon and Rebecca had submitted. Part of the written condition Marianne had laid out when she created the education trust for Ava. Rebecca's pay from the salon was modest, but steady. Brandon's hours at the warehouse had increased. More impressive, their savings account, once at zero, now held a balance just above $2,400. Nothing extravagant. But it was earned. They hadn't asked for more. And that, in itself, was proof of change. Marianne placed the documents in the filing cabinet labeled Family Oversight, then walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a box she hadn't touched in over a year. Inside were memories, good ones mostly, cards Ava had drawn, old photos, even one of Brandon as a boy, holding a fishing pole twice his height beside Edward, both of them grinning like fools. She found what she was looking for, an envelope marked in Edward's handwriting. To Ava, for when she turns 21. It wasn't sealed. She had read it once, the night she created the trust. Now she read it again. Dear Ava, if you're reading this, you're an adult now. But I hope you still keep some of your sparkle from when you were little. You were always the brightest star in the room. This trust, and the gifts that come with it, are yours because your grandmother and I believed in your future, even before you knew what it would look like. But this isn't just about money. It's about learning who to trust, how to love, and how to protect what matters. If this letter ever reaches you because something hard happened, remember this. Family isn't who asks the most from you. It's who protects you without asking anything in return. Grow well, grow strong, and never let anyone plant doubt where there should be roots. With all my love, Grandpa Edward. She folded it gently and returned it to the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. A knock came at the door just then. Not the bell, just a soft knock. Ava's voice followed. Grandma. Marianne opened the door to find her granddaughter standing there, invention in hand, beaming. Brandon stood a few feet behind, holding a box of banana muffins. Rebecca's stuck at work, he said. We thought we'd surprise you instead. Marianne stepped aside. Brandon entered quietly, placing the box on the kitchen counter. "I baked these," he added quickly. "Not store-bought. Scout's honor." She raised an eyebrow. "You were never a scout." He grinned. "Still learned to measure flour." They sat around the table, Ava chatting away about her project. Marianne listened with quiet pride, watching Brandon as he asked Ava questions, praised her effort, and smiled without forcing it. For once, he wasn't trying to impress. He was just present. And that, Marianne thought, might be the most progress of all. Later that week, Marianne received another letter. This one tucked into her mailbox without a return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. "Rebecca, Marianne, I don't deserve another chance, and I know it. But I wanted you to know I've been keeping a journal. Of this year, of what I've learned. You were right. About everything. When you stood your ground, I thought you were trying to punish us. But now I see. You were trying to wake us up. And you did. Brandon is different. So am I. We still fight. We still stress. But we're not pretending anymore. I hope that one day, Ava will understand how close we came to losing everything. And how you stopped it. If that counts for anything, thank you. Rebecca." Marianne folded the letter and placed it in the same file where she kept Edward's journals. Not because she forgave everything, but because it was a start. People don't always get second chances, but they do get the opportunity to prove they've changed. And Rebecca was finally trying to do just that. On the last Sunday of the month, Ava came to spend the night. They made apple cider, played dominoes, talked about what high school might be like someday. Ava asked questions about Edward, about what kind of grandpa he was. Marianne answered each one with a smile and a story. Then, out of the blue, Ava looked up and said, "Grandma, do you think Mommy and Daddy will stay better?" Marianne paused. "I think they're learning," she said gently. "And learning takes time. But they've come a long way." Ava nodded. "Good. I was scared for a long time. But I'm not anymore." Marianne reached over and tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. "You don't need to be. You're protected." That night, Marianne watched her granddaughter sleep peacefully in the guest bedroom, arms wrapped around the small stuffed elephant Edward had given her on her second birthday. And she knew, without question, that she had done the right thing. She hadn't just saved her future. She had saved Ava's. The first day of summer arrived with a breeze sharp enough to rattle the wind chimes on Marianne Collins' back porch. She stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee from the mug Edward once claimed as his own. A chipped old thing with faded writing that read, "Measure twice, cut once." That advice, meant for wood and wiring, had served her just as well in life. Especially now. It had been 9 months since Ava's whispered warning, since Brandon and Rebecca had nearly walked out of her house with full legal control of her finances, healthcare, and property. 9 months since Marianne had flipped the script on them and left them stunned, exposed, and, for the first time, powerless. She hadn't expected them to recover quickly. But what surprised her more was that they hadn't tried to retaliate. No guilt trips. No manipulation. Not even one phone call begging for money. Instead, they'd gone quiet. Then steady. Then consistent. And it was that consistency that made her pay attention. They were trying. Not performing. Not pleading. Actually trying. In late June, Brandon stopped by with Ava and a small potted fern. "We found this at the farmer's market," he said. "Ava thought your porch needed something green." Ava beamed. "It's called a maidenhair fern. Isn't that a nice name?" Marianne knelt beside her and touched the delicate leaves. "It is. Very graceful." Brandon handed her a folded sheet of paper. "This is a copy of our latest budget. Just like you asked." Marianne opened it. Everything was typed and categorized: rent, groceries, gas, daycare, savings. No fluff. No empty promises. Just structure. "Rebecca put it together," Brandon added quietly. "She's better with spreadsheets than I am." "I'd like to see her sometime," Marianne said carefully. "She'd like that," Brandon nodded. She's been humbled, Mom. In a good way." Later that night, Marianne opened the filing drawer marked Trust Conditions, Ava. Inside were documents tracking every month's progress. Receipts, pay stubs, counseling updates, budget sheets. She didn't keep them out of paranoia. She kept them as evidence that change, when tested, held more value than apology. 9 months down. 3 to go. And if they made it through, they'd receive access to the secondary trust fund. $50,000. Not a lottery win, but enough to start over the right way. That was her plan. That was Edward's spirit in motion. By early July, The neighborhood was alive with grills and lawn chairs. Kids zipped by on scooters, waving glow sticks and chewing freezer pops. Marianne hosted a quiet dinner for her bridge club friends. Ava helped set the table. "Grandma," Ava said over mashed potatoes, "do you think people can really change?" Marianne looked at her carefully. "Sometimes, but only if they want to, and only if they do the work." Ava nodded. "Daddy and Mommy are doing the work. Daddy doesn't yell anymore. Mommy stopped blaming everybody for stuff." Marianne considered that. "It takes strength to stop blaming. Mommy said you taught her that. She told me you made a really hard choice to protect me." She cried when she said it. That moment hung between them like a gentle weight. "And I told her," Ava added proudly, "that I want to be like you when I grow up." Marianne blinked quickly, then reached for her water glass. "Well," she said softly, "you're off to a good start." 2 weeks later, Brandon and Rebecca invited her over for a Sunday dinner. It was the first time she'd been in their home since the party. She almost declined, but Edward's voice echoed in her head. "Don't just test them. Give them room to pass." So she went. The house looked lived in, not staged. Toys were scattered. Shoes were kicked off near the door. The scent of something garlicky and warm filled the air. Brandon greeted her with a dish towel over his shoulder. Pasta with roasted vegetables. Ava helped chop. Rebecca stepped out of the kitchen, nervously wiping her hands. "Hi, Marianne. Thanks for coming." She extended a hand. "Not for performance. For peace." Marianne shook it. They ate together at the kitchen table. Talked about work. Laughed a little. Nothing grand. Nothing strained. After Ava had gone to bed, Brandon poured coffee while Rebecca took out a folder. "I know you didn't ask for anything this month," she said, "but I wanted to give you something." Marianne raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Rebecca opened the folder. It was a personal letter. Handwritten. "I've started keeping a journal," she said. "Every entry is about what we've done, what we regret, and what we've changed. When Ava is old enough, I want her to read it." Marianne sat quietly as Rebecca continued. "I don't want her to think this trust was just money. I want her to know it was a lesson. That we failed it once. That we earned it back." There was a long pause. Finally, Marianne asked, "And if I told you she doesn't need to know about any of this?" Rebecca smiled gently. "I'd tell you that's not true, because silence didn't protect anyone in this family. And I won't hide from what we did." Marianne leaned back in her chair and sipped her coffee. It was bitter, but honest, like the truth. On the last day of July, she sent an email to her attorney. "Proceed with the August review. If their paperwork holds up, begin drafting the trust release." She added only one line at the end. "They've earned the final test." And she meant it. 3 more conditions. 1 final month. And then a decision. The 1st of August arrived with thick humidity and the hum of cicadas. Marianne Collins woke early, standing barefoot on her back porch, a mug of hot tea in her hands. The sun was still shy, barely stretching its arms over the treetops behind her house. The air was dense and expectant. It had been exactly 11 months since Ava's whisper in the hallway had changed everything. She remembered every word, every moment, every warning sign she'd ignored before that. But now she was here, standing firm, watching the final pieces of her plan lock into place. The last month was not about money. It was about motive. That was always the last test. What people did when they thought the cameras were off, when they believed the inheritance was already out of reach. On August 6th, Marianne made an unannounced visit to the warehouse where Brandon worked. She didn't go inside. She stayed in her car, parked at the far end of the lot, just beyond the dumpsters and gravel where workers exited for breaks. She watched him clock out. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his face worn but peaceful. He laughed with a coworker, pulled out his keys, and drove off in the same second-hand Honda he'd been using for the past year. She followed, at a distance. He didn't go to a bar, or to the bank, or anywhere suspicious. He went straight to Ava's school. 15 minutes later, Ava came running across the blacktop and leapt into his arms. He spun her once, just once, then put her down, handed her a bottle of water, and opened the car door for her. They drove off, singing something with the windows half down. Marianne didn't cry, but she did smile. It was the kind of smile Edward would have made with pride in his chest and something quiet behind his eyes. That evening, she wrote in her journal, "He's showing up. Not for me. For her. That's the only proof that matters." August 15th. Marianne stopped by the salon where Rebecca worked. She hadn't called ahead. The receptionist greeted her, and Rebecca appeared a minute later, hands dusted with talc and hair clips stuck into her bun. "Marianne," she said, eyes wide. "You okay?" "I just needed a trim." Rebecca blinked, then nodded. "Of course. Come on back." Marianne sat in the chair, watching her in the mirror as she gathered the scissors, adjusted the cape around her shoulders. "You've gotten better," Marianne said. Rebecca smiled tightly. "Every Wednesday and Saturday. The walk-ins pay cash. I've learned how to hustle without scheming." Marianne studied her. Rebecca met her eyes in the mirror. "I know you probably hate me." "I don't," Marianne said quietly. "I pity the version of you that thought manipulation was love. But I don't hate you." Rebecca's hands paused. "I'd like to believe," Marianne added, "that the version standing here now is someone Ava can admire." Rebecca swallowed, then nodded. "She's the reason I changed. I wanted to be the kind of woman I'd want her to grow into. The kind you are." Marianne didn't answer right away. She let the words settle, because they were finally, after everything, honest. August 29th, the day before the one-year deadline. Marianne invited them over for dinner. This time, she didn't tell them why. She just asked them to come, with Ava, with no expectations, no folder, no financial documents. Just themselves. They arrived promptly at 6 o'clock. Brandon wore a button-up shirt. Rebecca brought salad and dessert. Ava ran in first, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers from their yard. "Grandma, we brought you something happy." Marianne laughed, taking the flowers. "They're perfect." Dinner was quiet but warm. Laughter came easily. Ava told them all about her new teacher and the art project she was planning. Brandon talked about a possible promotion to team lead at the warehouse. Rebecca shared that she'd picked up Sunday shifts at the salon. No one asked for anything. No one hinted at inheritance. They just lived. After Ava had gone to bed on the couch, curled up under Edward's old flannel throw, Marianne stood from the table and disappeared into her study. She returned with an envelope. Thick, sealed, stamped. She placed it on the table. Brandon stared at it. "What's this?" Marianne didn't sit. She stood behind her chair, hands folded. "That is your final update." Rebecca's breath caught. Marianne continued. "Inside is a letter from my attorney confirming that the secondary trust, $50,000, will be released to you both on September 1st. Unrestricted. No conditions." They froze. "You earned it," she said simply. "But more importantly, you earned my trust back." Brandon's mouth parted slightly, but he didn't speak. Rebecca reached slowly for the envelope, then stopped. "Are you sure?" "No," Marianne said. "I wasn't. Not for a long time. But you showed me something I didn't expect." "What's that?" Brandon asked. "That you're capable of growing beyond who you used to be." Rebecca blinked hard. Brandon finally spoke. "I don't know what to say." "Say thank you," Marianne said. They did. And they meant it. That night, after they left, Marianne sat on the porch swing with a blanket draped over her lap and Edward's mug of tea in her hands. The stars above blinked slowly, quietly. Her home was hers again, not just in title, but in peace. The war she'd never asked for had ended. But she hadn't just won it with legal paperwork or notarized documents. She'd won it with clarity, boundaries, grace. And when Ava would grow up someday and ask what happened that year, Marianne would tell her the truth. That she heard her, that she listened, and that she fought, not out of anger but out of love. Love that protects. Love that teaches. Love that doesn't bend just because family asks you to. And maybe, just maybe, Ava would carry that forward too. Because legacies aren't always built in bank accounts. Sometimes they live in the choices we make when no one's watching.